All right, today we're going to be talking about muscadine grapevines, which are native fruit-producing plants to South Carolina. Now, muscadine grapes are very unique as far as vines go. Some vines, they produce a little bit of wood but have a lot of new growth. These vines can get very old, number one. These vines produce bark almost all the way up the vine as it gets older. And these muscadine grapevines can probably grow maybe 40 feet up in the tree or higher. And that's very large for a grapevine. Now, one thing that these muscadine grapevines do, which is very interesting, it's a process called shade rooting. Now, shade rooting is one method of propagation. However, in this case, these grapevines tend to do it naturally. When they get to be a certain age and they're in a dark or shady area, because areas of shade grow as trees grow. More shade, it may not have been full shade when it started, but now that the trees are larger that it's on, it's in a lot of shade. And when that's the case, they tend to send out aerial roots. And that aerial root is kind of a side effect to give more energy to the plant because there's not enough sun. So that makes good sense. Now, if that's the case, the shadier it is, and you can tell the age of how long the plant has been in the shade by the length of the roots. So if it's a brand new kind of shady area, there may not be a big root system out yet, maybe a few years. But if this area, this grapevine has been in a very shady area for a long time, the aerial roots can go all the way to the ground. And they need to go to the ground in order to help give energy to the vine. So that's one thing to keep in mind about them. The other is that when they produce fruit, it's usually a time when deer are very hungry. And deer rely on this as a major food source. It's one of the larger fruits in the upstate area. So as far as what's native to here. Now, something interesting, one way to tell a wild grape as opposed to a cultivated one is the thickness of its skin. Now, because these grapes are wild, and when they ripen, they're maybe 40 feet up in a tree. When they ripen, they have a long way to fall. So in that case, muscadine skins are thick. That's why they're pretty thick when you have a wild one, as opposed to one you buy in the store, which is hybridized to have a thin skin. So naturally, they don't have those thin skins. But that's why, when you're a ripe grape and you got to fall 40 or 50 feet onto the ground, you got to have some cushioning. But that is also what makes them so good for you, is they have that thick amount of skin with all those good vitamins in them and nutritious things. So that being said about the grapevines, they can live, like I said, they can live for 100 years. They make an excellent bonsai. And that's one thing to keep in mind. I love grapevine bonsais because you can shape them into so many beautiful shapes. And you can twist the vines. You can do anything you want to make a unique looking bonsai. And eventually, if you trim it up enough, you can make it look like a little shrub. Because like any bonsai, when it gets to be a certain age, if you want it to grow even slower and slower, every time maybe a few years goes by and it's in that container for a while and it's root bound, you want to take it out of that container, put it in an even smaller container and combine, don't rip the roots off, but kind of, push them tight together into that container. It'll grow even slower. And by the time this grapevine is growing so slowly, you won't have to trim it very often and it'll look like a little shrub. Eventually transition from that original vine look to it to a little tree, a little shrub. So that's something to keep in mind. That's one of the reasons I like grapevine bonsais. All right.